You're listening to OPIS Talks, where you'll be in on conversations with insiders in the energy, chemicals, and environmental commodities markets. Guests share insights into the latest trends and innovations, industry challenges, and much more. Let's dive into the conversations that explore where the energy economy is headed, right here on OPIS Talks.
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to wherever you happen to be listening into today. This is the next edition of OPIS Talks. My name is Kevin Longworth. I am the Global Director for Acrylonitrile. I am based in Düsseldorf, Germany. And today with me, I have my colleagues from China and London. David, if you'd like to make a short introduction, and then I'll hand over to Zheng Wei.
Good day, everyone. As Kevin mentioned, I'm David. I'm a senior analyst working with Kevin as well as Zheng Wei, and I'm based in London. Over to you, Zheng Wei.
Okay, thanks, David. Thanks, Kevin. Good day, everyone. This is Zheng Wei here. I'm based in Beijing. I'm covering the China propylene and acrylonitrile market.
Thanks, Zheng Wei. So before we continue, today's discussion is about acrylonitrile, a word that I think many of us stumble upon. Some of us may have not heard of this. If you're listening in for the first time and you've never heard of acrylonitrile, you're not the only one. Through the course of this podcast, will give you a little bit of an understanding of this market. By the end, you'll have a view of what acrylonitrile is, where it's used. For the layperson who's never heard of it, let me just give you a very short intro of what acrylonitrile is, where it comes from, and what it's used in. It's actually a very important intermediate chemical. And I think maybe the key word here is intermediate. It's something that's used to produce other products. So you would never see acrylonitrile in its raw form available. It's typically used to produce some very interesting products. Some of those you would have heard of. So one of the key end uses for acrylonitrile is ABS, which is acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. If you've never heard of that, you would have certainly heard of Lego. And that is one of the one key uses for ABS is into toys, and it also used in electronic housings. So laptops, televisions would be made from ABS. Another interesting application for acrylonitrile is into acrylamide. So another chemical you might not have heard of, but this one touches every part of your life. It's a key chemical used in the treatment of water. So without acrylonitrile, you would not have acrylamide and you would not have clean water to drink. It's also used in the oil and gas industry to increase the yields. So when you extracting oil and gas from the ground, you use acrylamide to increase the volume that you can get out. Or acrylonitrile is also used as a precursor to manufacture carbon fiber, of course, something you would have heard of. And then another very interesting application is for acrylonitrile is the acrylic fiber market. So acrylic fiber is used to make fabric. It's often woven or weaved with other different blends. And I'm pretty sure everyone on this call would have at some point in their life had an acrylic fiber jersey or scarf or socks perhaps. So it's something you may not have heard of, acrylonitrile, but it's certainly something that's touched or been part of your life or been used in things you consume. Before we get into the weeds, I would say, of acrylonitrile, I'd just like to remind anyone who's interested in this market that we are having a global acrylonitrile and butadiene conference. This takes place on the 14th and 15th of November in Singapore. It's an annual conference. It's well attended by industry. So if you have an interest in this area, acrylonitrile or butadiene, I think butadiene is not the scope of this podcast today, but if you do, please reach out to us and we can give you more details. So having said all that, with the introduction, I think now is a good space or time to just give a short overview of the economic position we see ourselves in the world today. This is important because it sets the scene for sort of demand, supply, and really not just for acrylonitrile, but for the whole petrochemical space. You know, without a healthier economy, we're not going to see growth in this market. So where are we today? Well, to be frank, I think the world has gone through a very difficult time in the last few years. And we've seen relatively stable GDP growth over the last year. For acrylonitrile, what's interesting for us is the main regions, US, Eurozone or Europe, and the emerging markets. And certainly the highest levels of growth we see for the economies are coming from the emerging markets, where growth numbers could be anywhere between 4% in Southeast Asia up to sort of 5% or just below for China. And for India, which is the largest growing market, we're looking at somewhere around 6 to 6, or the high 6% range. US, our economy this year is expected to grow around 2.7%. And economists tell us we're looking forward to a slight uptick in GDP growth next year for the Eurozone. But, you know, GDP is one thing. Does that really translate into higher growth for the markets? I think we'll discuss growth a little bit later in this presentation. But I'd like to also, before we get into sort of focusing really on acrylo, there was in fact a very important conference over the course of the last week. David and myself attended that. It was called the EPCA conference. This is where the industry for not just acrylo, but multiple petrochemicals meet once a year. This year it was held in Berlin. And this is a conference that is held to discuss many things within industry. Key amongst those are contract discussions around volumes, around pricing, around the current state of the market. David was there as well. We had many discussions with clients.
But Kevin, if I could add, I mean, what do you think are the three main themes that really came out from the conference, the EPCA?
One was that we don't see a huge shift in demand. So we've seen relatively stable markets over the course of 2024, and the expectations from our end users, both the producers of acrylonitrile and also the consumers, is that next year will be the same. I think another key takeaway is pricing. So we've seen perhaps more flexibility for some producers to move contract discussions down, meaning the end users will pay slightly, perhaps less than they would last year. And I think the other key thing that is perhaps a little bit of an is not clear to us right now, but there's still a lot of or potential for flux in the market in terms of rationalization of capacity. So, David, I know there were a lot of companies at the EPCA, but there was one company that wasn't there.
Oh yeah, and I believe I think that company really put a shock in the system. But nonetheless, I think people, that understand that company wasn't there, they understand that the issues the company might be facing could be quite dire.
Yes. So I hesitate to put the name out there, but I think that the company involved is in the US. They've had some difficult times, and I think over and above that, not just this company, there are other companies around the world, or producers, shall I say, that are having a very difficult time. So I think another key question for us is rationalization in the future, and that was also a topic. So the focus of EPCA, David, is predominantly on US and Europe, right?
Yeah. Also, as you know, Kevin, I think there are some intertwines with Asia as well. So some topics would come up with regards to how Asia might impact, Europe, and also what are situations going on in Asia as well.
Indeed. And there is another global conference coming up in Asia. Zheng Wei and myself will attend that. That's called APIC. And that takes place next year. So that will be the key discussion or the time for key discussions around the Asian markets. Moving on, I'd like to draw Zheng Wei into the discussion now. Zheng Wei is our man, so to speak, in Asia. He covers the Chinese market. This is a very important market for us in terms of acrylonitrile, not just acrylo, but all products. So what are things doing out there, Zheng Wei, in terms of pricing? How are plants running? And perhaps, what's your expectation for the coming weeks?
All right, thanks, Kevin. Well, I would say it only became more important, over the past maybe 2 years, because obviously China has built. China used to be a net importer of acrylonitrile because we don't produce a lot of acrylonitrile here, but over the past 2 years, we have built a lot of new capacities. Now the market is basically oversupplied and it become more volatile. For example, the current price is around 8,000 to 9,000 RMB per metric ton. But just over maybe 3 months ago, the price was around 11,000 RMB. So, it can drop sharply within a short time. And it all depends on the, I would say, supply and the demand, like you mentioned about the run rates. So, back to 2022, I think the overall run rates for acrylo in China can be as high as 85 or even 90% sometimes. But now it was only 65 to 70%. So obviously, although we have built a lot of new capacities, but the operating rate dropped, considerably. And also because of the market is oversupplied. So I have to say, in the short term, at least, maybe towards the end of this year, or at least in the next few months, the price will be more like, stabilized at a relatively low level and just wait for the demand to catch up.
Yeah, China has been a rising power in the acrylonitrile world, also for downstream derivatives that consume it. I also see that outside of China, there's quite a lot of activity in the market. We did not only meet with European producers, we met also with some of the key producers and consumers from Asia at EPCA during the last week. So David and I had multiple meetings, and the feeling from some of the other key producing countries, South Korea and Taiwan, is that they're also under a lot of pressure in the short term. We're seeing prices increase in some regions because of changes in legislation. So that was also a topic of discussion at the EPCA conference, was whether or not China can actually export to India. There's some upcoming legislation which would prevent that, but it seems like industry is quite confident that this legislation will be moved or delayed and only implemented within the next 12 months or so. There's some changes potentially coming also in Southeast Asia for production. We hear of potential closures there. And none of these have been officially confirmed to the market, but if that does happen, we could see some changes in trade patterns around the Asian region in the coming months. So, David, one of the things as well at EPCA was demand. I mean, I didn't hear anything about the market recovering, did you?
No, Kevin. I mean, from our experience, especially in those pockets of meetings, everyone seemed to feel that demand will more or less stay the same. There wasn't a lot of optimism with regards to an uptick in demand. Although, as we all know, I mean, there've been some stimulus that's happened in China, but those will also take some time for that to kick in nonetheless.
So I think on the subject of China, I mean, Zhengwei, I guess you're best placed to answer that. Last week was a holiday, obviously, the Golden Week. Everyone's back to work, working hard. And do you see any changes with regard to the Chinese market because of the stimulus packages?
There's not much more I can talk because both of you guys mentioned about the stimulus packages. Back to the topic. I think overall this year, I would say obviously as you mentioned at the beginning of of our talk, Kevin, basically acrylonitrile is not directly linked with the economy, but all the downstream derivatives are highly linked with the performance of the whole economy. So I think the China's economy was, maybe I would say, not as great as expected for this year so far. Obviously, the government has set a target of the GDP growth at around 5%. I think they need to do more to achieve that target. And as both of you guys mentioned, and I think nowadays the news spread really quickly and widely. So I think in the last week of September, it was at least they were showing they are going to do something to boost the economy in the fourth quarter to at least achieve the target. And I think and also to support the property market, which is an industry that is drive the demand for the ABS. So if the policies can work, then obviously we may see some improvement on the ABS demand. And in that case, that will also drive the demand for acrylonitrile. But, just as David mentioned, it will take some time before we can really observe the effect of the stimulus policies.
So, I mean, from my understanding, looking at the policies that they've implemented, it's to cut interest rates, it's to spur lending. And I think the interest rate one is interesting because for those of anyone in China who has credits or owes money, they would then have less or lower their debt burden. And obviously for lending, that could spur investment. But I suppose those things take time. I guess question for you, Zheng Wei. Are you planning to buy a new television this week? Do you feel richer?
Not yet.
Probably not, right? Yeah, I think it was interesting at EPCA. Everyone was kind of expecting China to open, I think, the day after the Golden Week, and magically the economy is going to recover. But as you said, these things take time.
Well, I think this year's Golden Week actually was better. I would say the Golden Week was better than expected because it kind of tell you because the stimulus policies was announced before the Golden Week, right? You don't really know I think they really mean to do this so that people will feel more confident to consume during the holidays, and it did work. But now is the time that they need to make sure they have the policies coming out in time so that people don't lose their confidence. So to make sure that people's confidence don't just last for 1 week. It need to last longer, maybe for a couple of years. So for the economy.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the economists tell us that the economy, as you said earlier, the target is 5% or above. But really, I mean, the data we are seeing is that we might not reach that this year. Thanks, Zheng Wei. I just wanted to touch on another topic, which really is a buzzword. I mean, several years ago, the word sustainability had a different meaning. I think if you'd said sustainability for acrylo, it probably meant whether the company was going to survive or not. But sustainability means many different things to many different people, depending on which way you look at it. For acrylo now, I think what we've seen at EPCA, and even before that, the conversation is now about carbon. So the contained carbon in the production of acrylo. So we had some interesting discussions at EPCA, and I'm sure we will continue to do so with our clients in the future because this topic of sustainability is moving up the agenda. There is, however, some upcoming legislation which could impact part of the supply chain or the raw material feedstock costs for acrylonitrile. I didn't mention this already, but I didn't want to get too technical, but just to give you the high level view, for the production of acrylonitrile, you need propylene and ammonia. And ammonia is something that's used to produce fertilizers primarily. But there is talk about changing some of the legislation which may impact pricing of ammonia. David, I don't know, you were there. You remember our discussions on CBAM. I don't know if you want to just go over some of the high-level points about what that may mean for acrylonitrile producers and consumers in Europe.
Kevin, sure. I think CBAM may not sound unusual to most people in the chemical industry, but nonetheless, I will just give a quick overview. Anyway, CBAM, which is a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So I think this aims to ensure, I believe, equal treatment of domestic and imported goods. They apply a charge, to carbon emitted, during the production of imported carbon-intensive goods, such as aluminium, cement, iron, and also ammonia, which is one of the primary feedstock for acrylonitrile production. So I think the overall thing is that CBAM aims to prevent carbon leakage. Nonetheless, we know that CBAM is to come into force in 2026, and this will be in conjunction with the ETS, which is Emission Trading Scheme. I don't want to go too much into the technicalities. What we know is that from a high-level perspective, the ETS benchmark allowance, this decreases by, give or take, 0.2% between 2026 and 2034. Then from 2034, we can really see the total cost per ton of CO2 escalating. So be for both from a producer perspective and also from an importer. The bottom line of the story is this. When CBAM comes into force, there will be added cost towards ammonia production, and also those now imported ammonia. This will mean added cost for one of acrylonitrile feedstock. And also, as we get to 2034, when there are no longer allowances, this cost could quickly escalate. Over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, David. I think anyone listening to this would hear the word increased costs, and I think that is something that the producers and the consumers of acrylo are trying to understand. This is new legislation that's coming into force. Essentially, and just another aspect of it I wanted to mention, David, is that it is something to drive investment into the ammonia industry in Europe or other regions so that they lower their carbon emissions. Whether or not that makes Europe less competitive, I think this is the thing we are worried about. And for end users, it does potentially add an additional cost. Having said that, on ammonia, we are in the process of launching an ammonia service. This is a very interesting space. There's a lot of developments on ammonia in terms of blue, green, all the different colors of ammonia, how we deal with that in terms of CO2 emissions on. We talked about CBAM. So ammonia is in fact a key part of our, not just acrylo, but going to be a key part of what we evaluate and research in future. But we are looking to launch a service in the future, so watch this space. I think for today, that's quite a comprehensive view around the world of acrylonitrile. I'm sure David, Zhengwei, and I could probably discuss this for another hour or so, but we want to keep it concise and to the point. I would also just like to remind you, we do have a conference in Asia, which is coming up, as I said, Singapore, on the 14th, 15th of November. So if you want more details, get in touch. Of course, it goes without saying, if you also want to know more about the acrylo markets, contact one of the experts you've heard here today or directly to OPIS, and we'd be more than happy to give you more information about that. So I'd like to thank David and Zhengwei for your time today. Appreciate that. Both great insights. Thanks, David. Thanks, Zhengwei.
We hope you've enjoyed today's insider conversation on OPIS Talks. Join us next time for a deep dive into another industry insider's world. You can find more OPIS Talks episodes at opisnet.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.